I have the immense pleasure of facilitating this panel here tonight. For you all, I want to thank you all for being here. These kinds of discussions are important for us to have as community members, people that live here in San Antonio. I think it's evident if we look around the world that if you're committed to social justice, if you're on the left end of politics, this isn't the world that we would have made, right? We wouldn't have made a world of coal burning, a world where, we're incarcerating the majority of the world's prison population. We wouldn't have created a state where Governor Abbott is militarizing the border. And given that, it is also a history of us having lost some key fights, right, along the way. And yet we don't talk about loss and grief enough as a movement. And we're very lucky that a gifted writer and observer of the left, as well as a participant in Rabble Rouser, is here to make some contributions to help us discuss this topic. And we're also joined by people with first-hand experience in running campaigns that try to transform the city we all share to make it better for the majority. And so just a deep thank you to both the people who chronicle our movements and the people who lead our movements and build power for others. So who are we going to talk to tonight? Beginning with Sarah, the guest. I am happy to report that over the short time that she's been in Texas, she's already acquired a pair of cowboy boots.
They're really good, too.
They look very cool. She was in Austin last night and heading to Houston, so she's doing a mini tour of the state.
Thanks to Alex.
Yeah. So Sarah is a writer and reporter living in New Orleans and on the road. She's the author of Work Won't Love You Back, How Devotion to Our Jobs Keeps Us Exploited, Exhausted, and Alone. She's also the author of Necessary Trouble, Americans in Revolt, and she's the author of the book that we have here tonight, From the Ashes, Grief and Revolution in a World on Fire, all from Bold Type Books. We're also joined by Joleen Garcia. A round of applause for Joleen. Joleen is somebody who's near and dear to my heart. That's the first thing I want to say before reading the bio. There was a time in my life when I spent a lot of time with Joleen deliberating about what we were going to do to fight the city, then to fight the legislature, then to fight the Texas Supreme Court. And we're going to talk about that tonight. So I just want to extend a personal thank you to Joleen for teaching me so much. So who is Joleen? Joleen has a passion for building people power and has fought alongside the underdog since grade school. She spent 20 years as a local organizer in San Antonio, an activist on issues from the Save Our Aquifer campaign in 2002 to the victorious passage of the Progressive Free Speech Ordinance in 2018, and also the successful approval of the Paid Sick Leave Ordinance for local working families, the second ordinance to pass mandating paid sick leave in the South. Currently, Joleen is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Councilman Jalen McKee Rodriguez of San Antonio City Council District 2. So once again, give it up for Joleen.
The other mic, that's getting a little bit of...
Yeah, thanks. Now we have Ananda Thomas, who just handed me the mic. Thank you, Ananda. Who is Ananda? First, I want to say, same as Joleen, I think a lot of time on the phone with Ananda talking about campaigns. So when it comes to folks who have first-hand experience really grappling with power, incredible power, Ananda is one of them. I've learned a lot from Ananda, and I cherish my friendship with Ananda. So just thank you from me to you. Ananda Thomas has spent her childhood in Texas before moving to New Mexico for high school and her early college years. After attaining a bachelor's degree in sociology and social work, she traveled the country working for AmeriCorps, where her interest in grassroots organizing and electoral politics began. She spent almost a year in a program called Change Corps, an academy in grassroots organizing, before moving to San Antonio, where she served as the regional field director for the Bernie 2016 campaign and later organized for the Texas Organizing Project. I know there's some top members in the crowd, so shout out to top. Ananda graduated with her master's in political science from UTSA in 2020 and has since dedicated her time to fighting for racial justice and against police brutality in San Antonio, first with the Prop B initiative, and now with the organization that she founded called Act for SA. The organization has since become the leading abolitionist advocacy organizations in San Antonio and led the largest decriminalization charter amendment ever seen in Texas, known as Prop A. She's also won multiple criminal justice policy changes in Bexar County and established the first dashboard in Texas that tracks police suspensions and firings, copthedata.com.
Right. Check it out.
Just a little bit of a preview of tonight's program. We're first going to have Sarah read a passage from her book. Then we're going to have Joleen and Ananda each talk for about 10 minutes about their experience with the campaigns that they were so integral to running. Then I'll have some moderated questions that come from me. And then we'll have questions from the audience. And finally, if you're interested in picking up a book, we do have about 15 copies for sale that I'm sure Sarah would be happy to sign at the end of the event. So be thinking of questions. If you have experience with community organizing of your own and you're wondering what to do with grief, what to do with loss, I hope this conversation is really fruitful for you. Make the most of it. And just to also say a thank you to Deceleration for capturing this conversation.
Yes.
Archiving, grassroots organizing is so critical, and we know our local media and certainly our corporate media doesn't always do it. And so hats off to those that, even on a shoestring operation, produce high quality journalism. Thanks so much to the folks at Deceleration. So with that, I will hand it off to Sarah to go ahead and read.
Can I get another round of applause for Alex? A couple months ago, and was like, so I wanted to get you to San Antonio for a while, and maybe we can set up a little tour of Texas. And suddenly I'm doing 4 talks in 3 days in 3 different cities, and everything is paid for, and people are putting me up and feeding me, and I bought the most amazing cowboy boots yesterday. So it's really nice to be here. Also, he's found me amazing conversation partners because, I'm a journalist, right? My job is to talk to people about the cool work that they're doing and put that on the page and put it in conversation with other people's work. So I'm excited to be here, especially because, I've been trying to ignore this election, frankly, because I figured I knew what was going to happen. And now I'm here, and I live in Louisiana, so, solidarity from Landia to Abbottlandia. We don't have the border, but we've got a lot of other problems. So it's really good to be in Texas with people who have never been under any illusion about the place that we live and the fights that we're in, right? Because when I lived in New York, a lot of people had some ideas that, they're losing because Eric Adams is now mayor. But, yeah. So on that front, speaking of Eric Adams, we decided I wanted to read from a bit about fascism, which is towards the end of this book, because, for obvious reasons. But, yeah, so I'm starting sort of in the middle here, so if people don't know who Antonio Gramsci is, I will answer any questions you want later, but anyway. So Gramsci was sent to prison for having been the leader of the Communist Party, locked up not simply for opposing fascism, but for advocating an entirely different world and for laying out strategies for how to get there. At the trial that would send him to the prison that would destroy his health and kill him shortly after his release, the prosecutor famously insisted, "We must stop this brain working for 20 years." When I first heard this, I got choked up. Today again, reading it, it makes me want to cry. They did and did not succeed in stopping him. His prison notebooks are widely read and quoted today, yet he died before those 20 years were up. Fascism required blood sacrifice, thrived and thrives on a romanticized view of brutality and death, of which Gramsci's was not by far the worst. Fascism is the process of not only rendering certain lives ungrievable, but in fact making their ending something to celebrate. And so it recurs in greater or lesser proportions, wherever the deaths that a capitalist society requires cannot be fully moved out of sight. And so it is coming back now. It is, of course, not often called fascism when it returns. It may not look exactly like the thing that came before. It comes wrapped in nostalgia for past glory and a thing that looks like grief. It longs for sovereignty as death, and the power of ethnic purity and masculinity, which is to say it longs for domination that is both imagined as natural and also must be reinscribed with violence. It grows out of collapse and offers to alleviate the fears that collapse brings. As Peter Mitchell wrote, we escape the trauma of the history we happen to be living through by entering the mythic time of the history we didn't. It is a fantasy, but one that is compelling because at least on some level, it acknowledges grief before shrinking it into grievance. Fascists, too, I learned in writing this book, memorialize their dead with presente, the word the same in Italian and Spanish. If grief is unruly, undisciplined, unmanageable, and sometimes unintelligible, if sometimes we do not know precisely what it is we are grieving, the energies that can be harvested are enormous. They can be turned toward justice or brutality. In a society where grief has been foreclosed so much of the time, which cannot deal with loss, a lot of people confuse a feeling of discomfort for unsafety and exercise their power to put other people in an actual position of unsafety. Because their discomfort is the worst they can imagine feeling. They rage at Black people demanding justice, at migrants demanding admittance at the border, at the loss of jobs that upheld a certain kind of masculinity, at the request that they wear masks to avoid the spread of COVID, at the idea that fossil-fueled consumption might have to change to avoid planetary catastrophe. Sometimes they turn to conspiracy theories to justify this rage, other times just outright denial. The first time I went to Indiana in 2016, I met Tom Lewandowski, a longtime organizer who had watched his community tilt further and further right. Bad bosses and totalitarians create spaces between people. Donald Trump is probably both, he told me. Trumpism and other right-wing movements offered emotional representation rather than material. They gave resentments a name and a shape. Resentment, Mark Fisher suggested, is a form of anti-solidarity or negative solidarity, and anger solely at the fact that someone else is getting what we think we should get. It divides, as Lewandowski said. Apocalypse and utopia, China Miéville reminded us, have always been intertwined. The good life for some, made possible by the immiseration of others. Death for the grunts, the foot soldiers, while those at the commanding heights of power aim to conquer mortality itself. The obsession of not a few of today's tech titans and right-wing power funders is to render death obsolete. Peter Thiel and Jeff Bezos, Sergey Brin and Jack Dorsey all pour their wealth into technologies that promise to reverse or halt aging. The hot new ideology is long-termism, which suggests that humans can in fact become post-human, digital beings rather than biological. The ultimate separation of human from nature, the body just another programmable machine. Where this overlaps with fascism's old is the idea that any kind of brutality might be justifiable in the present to ensure that this future utopia might come about. Perhaps it was not a coincidence that one of the blockbuster films of the summer of 2023 was Oppenheimer, the story of the Jewish physicist with communist leanings who shepherded the nuclear bomb into existence to defeat the Nazis. Much was made in the film of Oppenheimer's invocation of the Bhagavad Gita, the line, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds." On screen, the words humble, and then the press coverage has been nothing. Compared to my first two books, it's been really strange. And I think it is just sort of more proof that we're really, really uncomfortable as a society, as sort of Western capitalist culture, with this question. I make an argument in the book that capitalism can't deal with grief. And that the reason that it can't deal with grief is that it relates to us as just sort of more commodities, more inputs into a system that cannot care if any individual one of us dies, even if that person is the CEO of United Healthcare. There'll be another guy tomorrow denying insurance claims, right? Like, great. So, and I'm in the book I write about, remember the guys who were in the submarine that went down to try to see the Titanic and they got vaporized? And that's in here because it happened in the same week as a ship full of 700 people sank in the Mediterranean trying to reach Europe. And a lot of the people on that ship were from Pakistan, or two of the rich guys on the submarine were from Pakistan. And it's like, we're paying more attention to the death of one billionaire, right, than 700 people. And that's just kind of the world we live in, right? So we've heard endlessly about the shooting of the United Healthcare guy, right? And not anything about people who all died because his company denied their insurance claims. And that's capitalism, right? The death of one guy is a tragedy, and the death of hundreds of thousands probably is just business. So that's what the book's about. It's really cheerful. But it is also a story of people who are organizing. And so that's what I report on, and that's what each chapter is about, is people who have organized, who have won things. It's not just a book of stories of losing, it's also a book of stories of people who are winning things. And sometimes winning things just to have them yanked back, which again, we all know about down here. You pass something at the city level and the state takes it away. But yeah, that's why I'm really excited to be here in conversation with people who've been doing that organizing, because that's the only thing that's going to get us out of this depressing mess that we're in. And yeah, so thank you all for having me, thank you all for being here, and thank you guys for being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation to be here, and I appreciate all of y'all being here. And in particular, I love to ground myself in the work that I do alongside the people I do it with. And there's so many of you here today that I recognize from many campaigns. But in particular, Esther and Kevin, who fought alongside me, and Marilyn, who fought alongside me for paid sick leave, and who always reminded me of the work that they did that was deserving of much more than we give as a society. And so I thank you for being here. This is our story, right? And so I'm here to talk about the paid sick leave campaign. And in San Antonio, it's not unusual for us to come together and to bring people power at the local level, and to work together to accomplish something and to feel very powerful doing it. We were just talking today about, well, actually with Marilyn and with the both of you, just like how wonderful it is to work with people and to go do something meaningful together, and how it bonds you and keeps you together, and how it makes you feel a part of something larger than yourself, and how much hope that brings you. And it's almost medicine. It's almost like, the antidote to loneliness, the antidote to isolation, and the antidote to, despair, and hopelessness, feeling that that, man, there's nothing we can do about this situation that we're in. And so organizing, community organizing has been that for me. And it's the people that I've worked with that keep me doing it over and over again through different campaigns. And so first of all, I wanted to center my thoughts in the people that we work with. And also on the topic of grief, I've learned so much from Malkia Cyril. And I just want to say their name because I would not have the deeper understanding about grief if it were not for them. And very briefly, as I kind of merge this conversation with my own personal experience, Malkia very publicly shared their love and for Alana, their wife. And it was a beautiful celebration. I was part of the wedding in a little way, and so many, thousands of people, hundreds of people, probably, I don't know, thousands were a part of it. It was a very public celebration of love that, against all odds, came together and was celebrated freely, and very rarely do folks that are that don't conform to gender stereotypes get to celebrate in the open and with their friends, right? So it was so beautiful. And in particular, everything that Mac has gone through as a Black individual in this world, growing up as a Black Panther cub, right? So they celebrated their love together. And then very soon after, they came together and the community celebrated with them in true form to who they are, living out their idea of community and that we get through this together. They took us on that trip with them through the process of Alana's medical journey, right? And her journey all the way, to her death. And it was so powerful. So for Malkia and for me to witness how to make our community organizing into serving each other in a way that matters to our life, because everybody loses somebody personal and very, very viscerally, very close to them. But a lot of times we don't have each other to carry that with us. And Mac was able to show it and share it because Mac is also like a media justice genius. And so they were able to make social media work for us, because social media is such an organizing tool. So all the way through, we were walking that journey together, and Mac found ways for people to contribute in very meaningful ways. So I just want to say Mac's name because I learned so much about grief and about how we get through these issues together. And what Mac said was that, loss happens. It's sort of the catalyst, right? And grief is the medicine. Grief is the way that what we do in the next step after that catalytic experience happens. And we figure out how we survive, how we get through this. And sometimes, as you all know, the very medical explanation for the steps that you go through and the various paths that you can go through in grief. But it actually is the whole reason, it's the whole transformation, because grief and loss and grief can be transformative. Yeah. And so how does that apply to our movements? So let's take paid sick leave. Paid sick leave, 2018, we launched the campaign, and we then went into petition signature mode. We wanted to collect the most signatures we could to show support. I'm curious how many people here signed that petition, the paid sick leave petition or collected petitions, and were part of the campaign. So it was galvanizing. It was man, you too? Like, like we all did it. We all did it together. And everybody put their little granito de arena, right? Their little piece of sand to make the bigger thing happen. And so it was very much a community issue. I have no idea how I'm doing on time, so just let me know. And so then we went from that stage to city council and said, hey, we have over 144,000 people in San Antonio who signed this petition. We're demanding that you put paid sick leave into a city ordinance requiring, all employers provide paid sick leave. And there was a lot of strategy, a lot of late meetings, a lot of work that we put in together, and we had a choice at some point. City council had a choice. They could either send it to vote so that the public could go and vote on it, or they could pass it, and they could pass their ordinance, and then they could implement the ordinance. And it was a very difficult situation. Anyway, what ended up happening, let's jump to the end. They passed the ordinance, and we're like, yes, we got an ordinance, all right? And so it was all about how now are we going to implement this ordinance. But just like you mentioned, in the state of Texas, business lobby, like these these businesses that had a lot to lose in the financial sense, they came together to put forth a lawsuit against the city of San Antonio for passing paid sick leave. It went through various levels. State legislature was also, in the next year after we passed it, was also wanting to put in a bill that would kill it, would take away the local control to be able to pass ordinance like this. We were able to get through that legislature without having that happen. However, it still did the damage, right? And here we are, like Esther and Kevin and Marilyn are with me through it all, right? And we're going through meetings, we're talking to the media, we're organizing, events, and we're going to Austin, we're going to all kinds of different places to go and bring our voices on this issue. Well, eventually we lost in the courts. The courts essentially took our victory from us. And I was, after that happened, we were like, well, maybe, we can do XYZ. We can go to the city and have all of their contractors require paid sick leave, as a concession. But that didn't do anything for Esther, for Kevin, for Marilyn. They didn't work as a contractor for the city. And so I felt very responsible, for bringing us along for hope, to hope for this, than to have it taken away. And I felt very responsible for a lot of people. And even the I remember at one time you were saying, hey, a lot of the move, the younger, interns that move, they really look up to you, and I was very proud of the work that we've done. A lot of people got catalyzed into becoming activists and organizers because of paid sick leave. So there's, always, if you look, there's wins. But on a very material and concrete level, were people able to take time off because they had a sick child at home, or because they themselves were sick, or they were caring for their parent who's ill? No, And so we never thought about grieving it in a very intentional way. And so I kind of want to say, there was at one point where a coworker of mine, Denise Hernandez, I'll bring her up again. I'll bring her up because she asked me, she was like, did you ever process the loss? Did you ever? This was a couple of years ago where I was emotional about yet another issue that we had been fighting for. And she's like, have you ever processed the loss? I hadn't. And here I have examples of, what MAC had done, what, other people had done to pull us together. And talking with Lupita, we still can pull each other together to talk through these things. And so, and to, in many ways, we all have done different things with, it has all transformed us in some way. But did we share that with each other? And I'm not sure that we did. I'll say that we didn't. And so I kind of want to end it there because I think that happens to a lot. It's like stunted, right? It's stunted. I have something else to say about having an author come to our town and us sharing our stories and how I have unprocessed grief that I'm bringing to the table. I want to at some point bring that up, but just to stay on topic, that's where I'll end it right now. And thank you for letting me share that story.
Sorry, I'm like also recognizing right now that I also have some unprocessed grief and didn't like address some stuff. I just had this clarity moment. Thank you so much, Joleen. Yeah, I think especially within movement, but even losing somebody, grief is a process. I think it's an opportunity for growth and evolution and community, just like you said. I think so often we're taught to go through it by ourselves, or that it is a singular process, and it's not, and it shouldn't be, because we just need community to survive in general, but especially in movement, and especially as we are fighting for people's rights and freedoms and advocating for policy. I do think that this is a big shift, and I'm glad you brought this conversation to us of what we need to do within community and movement and in these battles, right, that we're in every day. And I know we've spent some time, so I want to make sure we get to the questions. I think, let me explain a little bit about Proposition B, Proposition A, and just share that throughout this, I think even without, one of the reasons that I was really excited for this is to help not just talk about the importance of grief and processing and having those debriefs and being in community and checking in with folks. Because like I just said, I just realized that it's been, 3 years since Prop B, and I never did that with anybody, and I have some unprocessed grief on that. So that's been sitting there 3 years, which probably explains several habits that I have. But there is, in every loss, there's that silver lining, and there are those wins, which I think Joleen has touched on, and I'm excited to talk about as we talk more about Proposition B, even some in Prop A. That one's much more sort of subject, but it's really important to recognize the wins and the things that you've gained in every loss that you might have had. Okay, so we've run 2 ballot initiatives. I think we'll probably be focusing a little more on Proposition B tonight, but I do think we should talk about both. So Proposition B, we collected petition signatures in 2020 during COVID, started during the election, and got it on the ballot in 2021. And what it was, okay, I'm trying not to get too deep into this. So our police associations or police unions, as you might call them around here in our major cities, all operate and negotiate their contracts under a set of chapters. The only one that's collective bargaining is Chapter 174. It also allows a police contract to stand above state and local law and policy. Whatever's in that contract is the law of the land, no matter if there's differing policy. And then there are other chapters for meet and confer, right? We're under Chapter 174 and 143 specifically that lay out like disciplinary loopholes that allow officers who are fired to get their jobs back. San Antonio has had one of the highest rehire rates for fired officers in the nation. At one point it was 70%. We're a little closer to 65% now. And off of the uprisings from the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, right, a group of community members started looking into these contracts and these chapters. So we were able to successfully get the repeal of Chapter 174 on the ballot. We had it was just a scrappy team. I mean, the original organizers of this, like literally one of them, OG, didn't know who her city council person was when she started looking into this. And we ran the only really serious threat to the San Antonio Police Officers Association supposed power that has happened in this city. It was, thank you. It was, it was one of the most incredible things that I've ever done in my life. Just the community that's come together. Unfortunately, we didn't pass it in the municipal ballot. We lost by 3,500 votes, so there was about 3% of the vote, which in itself was sad, but is a win because we got this close to the police association losing the power and the stranglehold that they have on our city council, right, and on our community. And they were scared, and they should be, right? They should have been. So that was Proposition B. That also from that loss led me to founding Act for SA because that previous group had folded, but there was a lot of energy. People wanted to know what's next. How do we keep this fight up? What's next? What's next? Who's going to continue this? So that's how Act for SA got started. Alex mentioned in the introduction that we had, for Act for SA, ran the largest decriminalization charter amendment initiative in the state of Texas. That was Proposition A, known as the San Antonio Justice Charter. And it was largely just decriminalize our communities. So decriminalization of marijuana, right up to 4 ounces, decriminalization of abortion, codifying the banning of no-knock warrants and chokeholds by SAPD, and then codifying and expanding cite and release, which is known as cite and divert in some places, to the full extent allowed by state law. So certain low-level nonviolent misdemeanors, you can give a citation over arrest, right, to help decarcerate our communities, help lighten the load on prisons, but and jails and prisons, but just give folks another chance, right, to not go through the system. 65% of the folks in Bexar County Jail right now are there pre-trial because they can't afford their bail, and it's for things that are only finable offenses quite often once they get to court, right? So that's the importance of policies like cite and release. The Police Association came out against this. They, because we've been such a threat the last time, we were outspent 4-1. I mean, in a municipal election, they spent $2 million, right, against us, which was insane. I think it was like 80% of all the money that was like raised for municipal elections across all candidates and ballot initiatives was literally them. And that was a tough loss because they ran a lot of misinformation and scare tactics that caused voters to vote against it. I also think that going into strategy, there were some things that we could have done better on policy language, as well as splitting up some of these initiatives. It was vote for all of it or vote for none of it. So that was a tough loss. We lost by quite a bit. But I think once again out of that, I see organizers that have stepped up that are now managers of canvassing teams. We built the largest progressive coalition that has existed since paid sick leave, and still continue those connections to this day, and have forced conversations about restorative justice, about alternative justice, about diversion courts and diversion programs, and like reproductive rights and things that continue now. So those are propositions A and B, just to give that. I think we're running a little on time, so I'm going to pass this back. Thank you.
We'll definitely have opportunities to raise more through the questions. I just want to say, thank you to each of you for sharing your stories with the audience, and also being willing to admit that, in the quick pace of Texas politics and in the quick pace of life too, that we don't always have the time that we think we need to really process these moments where we spent a lot of time and energy and built up a lot of trust in others, and that we don't always have the room for processing after a loss.
Yeah.
So just thank you to both of you for sharing what you've shared. My first question is for Joleen, but if any of you feel compelled to answer the same question, by all means. The question I have for you, Joleen, is given the formidable odds. There's entrenched bureaucracy, there's corporate opposition, there's multi-layered government resistance, right? The courts, the state. What kind of organizer do we need to sustain movements under these conditions? What kind of qualities, strategies, and mindsets are essential for facing defeat while still striving for meaningful change?
I think someone needs to be real. We can't get lost in, so we were talking about it. So we always talk, I think Esther and I were saying this today, that we should put our trust in the people. I think that when we allowed the city council to pass paid sick leave, it gave them the power to change, to make changes to the ordinance, and then it had less legal protection, because if the people had voted it in, then we would have had more, a heftier defense, because it was actually the will of the people. So what kind of organizer, an organizer needs to absolutely walk alongside the folks that we're organizing with, and we need to speak plainly in a way that all of us can be included and all of us can understand. We need to be less complicated with our goal. We need to be very clear, the messaging that we have, we need to make sure that it is grounded in working families and working people, and not in jargon, and not in each individual scenario that can possibly come up, so, because I don't think that we put enough pressure on city council by showing up to sessions. They only feel a threat if a ton of people, make them look bad or threaten their election.
Yes.
And we can't go in there like lobbyists, because that's not where we're gonna win. That is not the even playing field. So strategically, I believe that we need to be grounding our strategy in the people, and always, that the kind of organizer needs to be able to walk in and sit and talk at kitchen tables and feel comfortable being invited in, and not say okay, wait, you keep yourself safe, but at the same time, you don't put so many obstacles in the way of you and the people, and so in a very basic way, that's my kind of organizer, and that's what I want to see in the future of San Antonio. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it definitely did. I wanted to invite you if you wanted to make the earlier comment that you were.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I have, I felt a certain way about you coming to San Antonio, I'll just be honest, right? And you said it. So in the free amount of, the library lets you read some of it for free.
Yeah.
And so because there's a whole long story behind that. But so I was reading some of it, and I know that you acknowledge being a journalist is difficult and complex, because you're telling other people's stories and you're benefiting from other people's stories. And I was fearful and a little bit angry, right? That that you were coming into San Antonio, a primarily people of color and working class city, and that our stories would be taken, and that our stories are so valuable and precious, and that we are so unique and so special, and so we deserve to write our own book. We deserve to tell our own stories and write our own book. And I just had on one hand, the grief that I have because we're not able to tell our own stories. And that Spanish was taken away from our people, right? That language, our own customs, of that we aren't accepted in this space, and sometimes in universities and in, and so I realized that my anger was my unprocessed grief, of losing all of that, of losing our people and losing our voice, right? And so and it makes us very narrow, and I learned that, I don't know where I learned that from, but it makes us very narrow in our strategy. So we begin to think that you are on the other side, right? And it begins to make us think that that there's no way I can work with you. And that is not the way we're gonna win. That's not the way I'm gonna bring an inclusive, a powerful, a huge, people's movement together, right? So I have to be able to work through that enough to be able to hold that in one hand and still be open enough to figure out how we all benefit from each other, right? And what's your piece? And how do I accept what your piece is, right? So that's what I just wanted to bring also, is that, I just wanted to put it out there because I don't want to sit with it and be quiet about it. I do.
Yes,
I just wanted to be upfront.
You embody your own advice to the crowd, which is to be real.
Yeah. Can I just
Yeah.
say something? That's what I have to hear over and over and over again, right? And if I'm not willing to sit and hear that, then I don't deserve anybody sharing the story with me.
Right.
And if I am not sort of accessible to the people that I'm talking to and writing about and in community with, if they can't call me up and tell me that I got it fucking wrong sometimes, then I'm bad at my job. And that's a thing that's really important to me as somebody who is doing this because I care about the movements that I'm covering and is one of a tiny number of people who covers the stuff that I do. There are solid reasons that people don't trust the white girl who's showing up in town is hi, I'm a journalist. Of course, right? And I have to prove that to people every time I show up. And if I don't prove it to you, then of course you should tell me no. You should tell me to go to hell. And you should tell that to everybody. We were actually talking about somebody that I think does a very bad job of all this last night. That there's a reason that I don't come here and I'm gonna tell you about yourselves. I'm gonna sit here and want to have people up here with me who can tell me about a city that I'm not from and haven't been in. Because that's the work. And if I can't hear that, then people should tell me to go to hell.
Okay. I'm gonna ask Ananda a question. I just want to talk about, despite the defeats of Prop B and the Justice Charter, how can the act of challenging police power still be seen as a victory? In what ways does generating conflict with institutions like the police disrupt their dominance still, mobilize public discourse, even when the immediate goal of winning the initiative isn't achieved?
Yeah, no, I'm so excited for this question. I think especially when fighting the state, right, and police, but really just any kind of powerful opposition, we have to remember that this is a marathon, right? It's a long fight, and our ancestors, we're fighting the same fight they are, we're just slowly getting further and further, right? And I think that that's good level setting and grounding, and has helped me a lot too. Even when it is a loss, we're still pushing forward narrative, we're still educating people, we're empowering people, we're bringing more folks to the fight. And you definitely have to remember that when you're fighting police power, right, in this state. But I think it's critical really to any movement, right? We're up against big, powerful, well-resourced actors. And we're not just gonna, win tomorrow. It's gonna be down the road because we're working, right, on a legacy of movement. And even though something might be a loss, even heading into something, expecting it to be a loss, we actually expected with Prop E, we knew it was a worthy fight. But we did not expect to be that close, right? Like election night, I remember with Michelle Trumillo, we're at our watch party, and we're just like, holy shit. And we were just within like a couple of points, and like Michelle and I look at each other and we're like, we gotta look at that again, like, right? Because it's Sapoa, right? They've had this stranglehold. We're a bunch of grassroots organizers, not as well resourced and not as well entrenched. And so we did that fight even still expecting to lose, but still going to try our damnedest, right, and our hardest, because it's so worth it to crack that shell of supposed invincibility, and we did. I mean, we put forth so much, right, information in the public to like really bring down this like veil of accountability, right, and of not being violent. We're showing how many officers are getting fired 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times even, and getting their jobs back, right? And that's an actual case here. Lee Rakin, he's no longer with us at SAPD, but it took 7 times for him to get fired, to be able to leave the force, right? And showing that this is a problem, a regular, like, inherent problem here, really broke that whole, like, blue shield and veil that we have. And Sapoa, even afterwards and still now, has been pouring money into a Blue Cares program, right, and trying to give money to criminal justice nonprofits and all this to fix their image, because it's been shattered, because it just showed that they only care about their money and their people, and they don't care about community and the people they're hurting or the misconduct they're doing. As long as they keep getting a bigger paycheck and a bigger contract, they don't care. And we really were able to show that through the Proposition B fight. And so I think it's always worth it, even if you're not sure if you're going to win, even if you think you're going to lose, to fight police power, fight police brutality, right, to fight state violence. At any level, because you are showing their true colors, and you're going to be bringing more and more people with you, and every time it's just another chink in the armor and another chink in the armor, and that is always going to be worth it, because once again, it's a marathon, right? We're fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for our ancestors, and we're fighting for our future generations, and they're going to take on that fight too, so let's make it a little easier for them.
I'm going to ask one more question of Sarah, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. A writer that I really like, Olufemi Taiwo, stated once that residents of Flint, Michigan didn't need their oppression centered, they needed a strategy for clean water. How can this critique guide us in balancing the effective turn in politics, one where we center grief, loss, and oppression, with the development of concrete strategies for achieving material change? What approaches can ensure that emotional engagement complements rather than substitutes for actionable politics and organizing?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because like the affective turn is something that like I only started hearing about like this year. Or something people like the affective turn, and I'm like, really, what's that? Because where I am, most people are still just talking about strategy. And I think the thing, the thing that I've just learned from y'all tonight again, right, is that like people who are doing the organizing on the ground are just killing themselves for it. And then going afterwards, like, okay, we don't have time to rest, and we don't have time to hear each other, we don't have time to process, and we don't have time to take care of each other. So I wonder if the affective turn is just like the internet in some way. Like, is this like a conversation that's happening somewhere that like I'm not seeing reflected in the work that people are doing? I'm seeing it reflected in people who are tweeting, who are mostly not doing organizing. That said, like, I'm actually really heartened by some of the work that people are doing, and some of the folks that I talked to for this book, who are organizing in places like Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, or the folks in Minneapolis after successive, police killings, and the various other community work that people are doing, who are thinking about, like, okay, like, how are we taking care of each other after all of this? when we come down from things, whether they are wins or losses, like the attempt to abolish the Minneapolis Police Department and turn it into a Department of Public Safety, right? And that was a ballot initiative that lost. And the story nationally, right, is they lost that and now they've given up, and it's like that couldn't be further from the truth, but nobody knows, right? Because like the national reporters aren't telling that story.
Right.
And people there are like, okay, how do we take care of each other right now? How do we transition power? Right? Like there's a bunch of the organizations there that are shifting leadership, that people are stepping back and letting somebody new step up so they can rest.
Yes.
Without the organization sort of disappearing. And people are thinking about sort of in retreats, in community building projects, talking about like, what's your story? What's your grief? What are we carrying into this moment so that we can be there for each other and in community for each other, with each other better? And that's like, it's not instead of building material strategy, it's so that we can do that with our whole selves. And I think a lot of y'all in the room have been in the kind of organizing meeting I certainly have, where like somebody says something and somebody gets triggered and suddenly everybody's, as my friend Kelly Hayes said, like the trauma responses are sort of ping-ponging around the room and nothing can get done all of a sudden because we've got to like literally calm our nervous systems down, right? And so if we're taking care of ourselves and building spaces and processes for taking care of that stuff outside of the organizing meeting, then we can have the strategy discussion, hopefully without triggering ourselves. And if we do, then we can think about how to handle that and to support people through that without it derailing everything. Because when you're up against the police union, when you're up against all of the, the Chamber of Commerce or whoever the network of rich jerks that run the city is, right? Like, those people are paying lawyers, $1 million an hour to like strategize, and those people have no trauma responses to deal with, right? They're not processing much of anything other than the checks.
Yeah.
And because we do have to win, right? I'm thinking of the Asada Shakur chant, right? That it is our duty to win, and I've been thinking about that a lot this year because of Palestine, and just like every day that I look at my phone and I was like, we have not stopped this yet. And I'm Jewish, so that like hits real hard for me. It was like, it is on us to stop it. I'm Jewish, I live in the US, and my tax dollars are paying for this, and we have not stopped it. And that is not like just a feeling I need to process. We actually need to make it stop.
Yes. Yes.
So that means I gotta take my feelings somewhere else when we're talking about how to make it stop. And I get this specifically, again, like my sort of white lady Jewish feelings really have to be processed away from the meeting where we are trying to make it stop. But they do need to be processed because otherwise they do show up. And one of the things I think about a lot is like that grief, if we don't consciously give it space, it will take space. It will come and it will make you sick.
Yes.
And it will, it will surface in your body in all of these ways that we don't even recognize as such. So it's really, really necessary to do that, not as a distraction from, but as a way to help us be clear and powerful when we need to be.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I'm gonna open it up for questions, just time-wise, we have time for about 15 minutes.